I've mentioned before on this channel how easily frightened I was as a kid, and that one of the things I found scariest was Alien Mr. Burns from the Springfield Files, second only to the Weeping Angels from Doctor Who. The Weeping Angels speak for themselves, but I think it's a safe bet that I wasn't the only one scarred by The Simpsons and its horror anthology sub-series, the Treehouse of Horror. These episodes, the earlier ones at least, aired around Halloween and were made up of 3 short stories each, the majority of which are either parodies of famous horror or sci-fi stories, or inspired by typical genre tropes. There were times when The Simpsons did comedic retellings of true stories, or homages to films in the main series, being contained within the status quo routine where everything essentially returns to normal at the end of each episode. But the Treehouse of Horror was distinct from that setup, because not only did these episodes focus on retellings of scary stories, but they also didn't give a shit about continuity, and routinely killed off series regulars and the Simpsons family themselves. And despite only using these horror and sci-fi elements as theming for what's ultimately still a comedy show, in my opinion, Treehouse of Horror could at times be fucking terrifying. I think it's pretty clear why a kid could find these episodes so scary. There's creepy music and sound effects, vividly drawn monsters, and a generally ominous atmosphere that added to The Simpsons' already fundamentally surreal art. But for me, there are 3 underappreciated elements to these stories that made them go from unnerving to genuinely disturbing. And the first is almost paradoxical, in that it seemed an attempt by the writers to keep the episodes from being scary. People die a lot in Treehouse of Horror, and considering the series is typically a family-friendly sitcom, it wouldn't work for the characters to react to deaths with the kind of realistic pondering and heartbreak seen in the main series. So the writers keep it light by having the characters brush off a lot of the violence and death around them. But that's where the paradox comes in. To me, that actually made it scarier. The lack of realistic reactions make it feel like death is cheap in Treehouse of Horror. Like when something horrible happens to you, nobody really cares. It makes these characters we know and love feel kinda heartless. Despite being dragged and dropped from the main episodes to Treehouse of Horror, a lot of the characters don't really behave how you'd expect them to. And that ties into the second reason I found these episodes so scary. The way in which these characters are warped from their usual selves goes beyond just apathy. In many episodes, series regulars become out-and-out murderers. They cannibalise children, and turn into monsters. But through it all, they do it with a lot of the mannerisms we're used to. These aren't just body snatchers possessing the characters we know and love. It really is them doing it. Taking the familiar and making it uncomfortable is a huge concept throughout the history of horror. David Lynch's 1986 movie Blue Velvet famously took an average white picket fence American suburb, a totally typical setting for the time, and built his own pocket universe of madmen hiding just beneath that affable surface.
I'll fuck anything that moves!
And a lot of Asian horror movies, especially around the turn of the millennium, have taken ubiquitous modern technology and warped its inclusion in our daily lives into a really unnerving presence. And both Treehouse of Horror and the main Simpsons series managed this almost without even trying. They took what everybody was used to, changed it unrecognisably, then changed it back and acted like it never happened in the first place. But our perception of these characters is never the same. The Simpsons creators have this impressive ability to take what we know and twist it to great effect. This is a skill clearly honed by their time doing the same in the main series. Cause I've never seen Westworld, or Cape Fear, or Thelma and Louise, but I almost feel like I have, thanks to the Simpsons episodes based on each of those films. Treehouse of Horror is no different, and I think this is the third reason that some of us found it so scary. If you grew up watching The Simpsons around the same time as me, Treehouse of Horror would have been your first exposure to so many staple horror concepts that showed up in films from the generations before us. I saw the blood elevators and the dad of the house going mental with an axe in The Shining long before I ever saw The Shining. I've never seen Soylent Green, so I was horrified by the child cannibalism in Nightmare Cafeteria, and I was fucking traumatised by Nightmare on Evergreen Terrace. because at the time I'd never heard of Freddy Krueger. A guy that kills you in your dreams, a gremlin on the side of your bus, a killer doll. When you're a kid, you can't work that stuff out of your head easily, and it doesn't matter if it comes in a colourful, family-friendly package. I might be making it sound like I wish I hadn't watched these episodes when I did, but that couldn't be further from the truth. I loved Treehouse of Horror. It helped me to advance the ways I was thinking about storytelling, helped ingratiate me into the horror genre at large. I haven't watched too many of the newer ones, but from the looks of things, the staff are still using them as a chance to really push the boat out and try new stuff, mixing mad concepts with stylised art styles to flex their creative muscles. I've come to love shows like The Twilight Zone, Love, Death and Robots, Girl from Nowhere, and Black Mirror that do the same thing, utilise their anthology formats to exercise great breadths of style and plot. And I'd be lying if I said this love for short-form horror, sci-fi and surreal storytelling didn't start with Treehouse of Horror. And I bet I'm not alone.